From the lowest to the highest, from the furthest to the nearest, from the smallest of the smallest to the greatest of the greatest, yoga is about all of life, everything we do, all of existence. My name's James Bogue. Welcome to the Whole Life Yoga Podcast. Hello there, Bill.
My friend, how are you doing, my friend? Good to see you
Yeah,
again.
very happy to see you.
Always good to see you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, since we last spoke, Bill, there's a topic that I'm keen to ask you about. And last time we spoke, you took us back to 65 years ago when you first began your journey with the Marine Corps and that
Right.
transformative experience. And we mentioned, as in the previous conversations, your work on the Bhagavad Gita and living with this text and this translation and this practice, this process of being with the teachings and diving into the Sanskrit and really wrestling with the messages and the teachings with your great, let's say, comrade, mentor, translation partner, Ajahn Tassani. But I've been fortunate as well as to read your Gita and some of your essays around the Gita, some of the pieces of writing that you refer to as vignettes. And one of those vignettes refers back to another time that's now a long time ago, around in a similar period when you were still a teenager.
Mhm.
And I confess, Bill, that when I read it, well, I've read it more than once.
Oh,
It brings
okay.
tears to my eyes.
Yeah.
And this is the one about your experiences with the choir.
Oh,
And
the Black Church.
yes,
You're
and
referring about my time with
yes,
the 3 years I spent with the Black Church when I was a young boy.
indeed.
Yeah.
And it's striking to me that Gita means song.
Mhm.
And when you first told me about, because you spoke to me about this experience before I read about it, but it was striking to me because I like singing, and singing something that I practice and I enjoy sharing in the yogic context as well as just more broadly and more generally.
Mhm.
And when we first met, you gave the impression of being a person who, singing wasn't so much a part of your day-to-day life, but
Oh my
nonetheless,
God. Oh.
that song and music and this vibration or this resonance that can call you into the present moment had been a very important stage or an important moment in your journey of a lifelong seeker. And so I was
Mhm.
keen to ask you more about that encounter with spirit through the medium of song and some of your experiences during that stage of your life and how that imprinted principles or lessons or understandings that then supported your ongoing journey, Bill. So
Well, it was kind of interesting, James, because picture this. The year is 1957. Okay, 1957 is before the civil rights movement began, really. So here I am. I'm 15 years old at the time, and it's a Sunday morning, and I've officially been an atheist for about 2 years now. I became an atheist at 13 after I read William James's The Varieties of Religious Experience, in which all we're all born with the desire for, we have the DNA for religion, but it all depends on culture and the ways we look at it. And some people are programmed to become Zen Buddhists, and some are programmed to become communists, and some are programmed to become Republicans and Democrats and Jehovah's Witnesses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, depending on, belief systems. So for me, since there was no objective truth, then it's all individual. It's all how you basically delude your own mind. So it's all delusion. It's just all, how do you ask the question, how do I want to delude myself? Do I want to become a Methodist? Do I want to become a yoga? Do I want to become a communist, a Nazi, or Republican, or a Baptist or Methodist or Catholic, or, what do I want to become? Kind of thing to believe in, something to believe in. We all want to believe in something. So to me, it's all relative. So if everything's relative, it's all subjective. And if it's subjective, that means there's no objective truth. So I became an atheist after reading William James's The Varieties of Religious Experience at 13. And I talked it over with my mom, and I'd gone to church faithfully, Sunday school and church. That was part of my life until I was 13. Every Sunday I was in church. And so, but I told mom after I read the book that, well, I'm not going to believe anymore. And then my mother said, okay, I like James too. And so you don't have to go to church anymore. She said, I just felt that it was something that I should do for you. So that was it. So I became unofficially kind of an atheist, not a real atheist, because believing in atheism is just another religion into itself. So I didn't necessarily believe in atheism either. It was just all relative, so okay. So anyway, here I am at 15 and, kind of a semi-atheist or whatever you want to call it, agnostic, I guess. So there I am visiting a friend of mine Sunday morning, and I'm walking back from my friend's house, and then it's in a part of town that I haven't really gone through, much before. And then all of a sudden I hear this incredible music coming out of this ramshackle kind of house. And then I look over at the ramshackle house, and it's obviously some kind of a church. So I walked over, and I was absolutely entranced by the music. I was stunned, and I basically kind of lost consciousness for a while, lost in the music. The song was Wade in the Water. I still remember the name of the song, Wade in the Water. And it was a Black church, and it was sung with this incredible fervor. But the music just put me into it. I lost consciousness. And that was very unusual, because I'm not the kind of person that does that. And then when I came to, when the song was over, two Black gentlemen stepped out of the doors of the church. They were in white suits, white vests, wearing white gloves, and very distinguished looking elderly gentlemen. And they said, young sir, is there anything we can do for you? And I said, well, if it's all right, I would like to stand out here and listen to the music, if that's okay. And then their reply was, but you can listen much better from inside. But I'm a teenager, I'm 15 years old, I'm wearing a t-shirt and jeans and sneakers. And I said, but I'm not dressed for church. Because in those days, you wore a suit and you dressed for church. And they said, not a problem. So they escorted me inside, and I was the only white person inside of the church. And they sat me down at a place near one of the pews, and people moved over so I could sit down. And I was just, again, blown away by the music. And then the minister made the sermon, which, frankly speaking, made a lot of common sense to me. It was all very practical. And then it was a Baptist church, the Second Baptist Church. Now, the Second Baptist Church is Black. The First Baptist Church is all white. So that was the distinction back then. So at the end of I shook the hands of the minister. His name was Peter Hamlin, Minister Hamlin. And in the language of the time, the courtesy, we would say Dr. Hamlin, as that was an act of courtesy. So I shook his hand, and he invited me back, and everybody was very, very friendly, very, very friendly. So I went home and told Mom about my experience, and Mom was interested. And I said, I think I'll go back. And my mother said, okay, please. So that went on for 4 months. Every Sunday I'd go back, and at the end of 4 months, the minister said, it seems to me that you like our church. You seem to like us. We like you. And so would you consider joining us? Now, for a white boy, the only white member of the all-black church in Junction City, Kansas in 1957, to become a member of a church, that's a little bit, shall we say, it's different. It's kind of different, because I come from small town Kansas, Junction City, Kansas. It was a town of 16,000 people. But one of the things about Kansas of that era, Kansans are a very strange people. They're not tribal. In other words, Kansans are a people to believe your business is your business. And as long as you are not doing anything that interferes with us or privacy, you can basically do anything you want to do. So, I mean, it was like, I talked it over with my mother, and I said, I'd like to join. So my mom and I, we talked it over, and we agreed that the community would find it very, very strange. But in Kansas, strange was okay, as long as you didn't bother anybody else. Okay. So I joined the church March 9th, 1958. I have that on my certificate. They gave me a certificate of baptism. That was the day I was baptized. And sure enough, everybody, the whole community talked about it, but not one person in my high school, not one person ever said anything about it. And especially in any kind of a critical way. Because my mother and I, we believed that we knew Kansas. And that was the Kansas mentality. So I never, ever came under any kind of, I didn't join the church for any kind of civil rights thing. I want to make this very clear, James. I was not motivated by anything connected with the civil rights movement. I had no part of that whatsoever. I don't want to take on false honors that I do not rate. I do not rate the honor of saying that I was involved in something for the civil rights movement, because I wasn't. I was involved with God. That's what I was involved with. I was involved with finding God. And it was a very, very interesting experience. So I was baptized on March the 9th, 1958. And let's see. And then immediately after that, I was invited to sing in 2 choirs. One was called the Young Adult Choir, men and women. And the other one was called the Men's Chorus. Of course, that was all men. And to do that, we all had to have our own song. And I couldn't sing. I mean, I croak. I mean, I just had a real croaking voice. But we all had to sing. We all had to have a song. So my song became Heaven So High, because you could kind of speak it. And as you say it along, and then when I begin to really croak, then the chorus come in behind me, and they cover over for me, kind of thing. So it was really good. But we sang all over the state. Our choir master was a sergeant first class, He was a steward for the commanding general of Fort Riley, Kansas. The first infantry division was assigned there. It was a military base, Fort Riley, Kansas. My mother had a very high-ranking position working for the Army for 43 years. So she had a very high position. She was head of all the purchasing and contracting of Fort Riley, Kansas.
Right.
And she had a very powerful position. And again, it's not a position that she was willing to put any kind of pressure on for, just so her son could become a member of a black church, kind of things. But again, we were from Kansas, so she didn't see it as a problem. I didn't see it as a problem because we knew Kansans. But it was a very interesting experience because we sang all over the state. And whenever we would sing, it was the emotion. The emotion was incredible. I've seen the time when, 80-pound ladies, it would take 6 large gentlemen to handle an 80-pound lady that was going into movement, kind of thing, going into a state of ecstasy. Of course, ecstasy means ecstasis, going outside the body. Yeah. Kind of thing. So it would be like that. And our music would put people in that kind of state. Yeah. I myself, when I began getting into the total connection with the transcendental aspects, I would always begin to sob uncontrollably. Mm-hmm. Crying was always my way. I would just sob uncontrollably. I would lose control of myself that way. So it was a very, very interesting experience. But there were actually 3 choirs in the church. I sang with 2 of them. One was the men's chorus, and the other was the young adults. And then there was a senior chorus. Now, in this senior chorus, of course, the senior being the key word here, these were old, elderly people. Mm-hmm. And in this group, they would sit quietly together. And then someone would raise out a kind of a wail. Yes. And then it would be joined into another. Somebody else would join in, and then a third or a fourth. And these were the old spirituals. No piano music, just pure song. And these would put just the hair on the back of my neck would go up. It was just incredible. Absolutely incredible.
I got
the hair on the back of my neck would go completely up. So it was a very interesting experience. And being the only white boy in an all-black church, I got to learn a lot more about the racial issues of the time. And it was actually, and my mother and I had total conversation with each other. We communicate, we read books. We were really, really into books. The house that I grew up with had books everywhere. So I was reading, like at 13, I was reading the 3 books that really, really controlled my entire life after that. One was William James's The Varieties of Religious Experience, which I think is the finest book on religion that's ever been written. The second book was Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. I became a real follower of Marcus Aurelius. And during my combat time in Vietnam, both tours, I always carried a book of Marcus Aurelius in my pack wherever I went. And when things got really down for me, I would read Marcus Aurelius. Mm-hmm. And then the third book, which was very, very interesting, and it goes along with a lot of teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, is Man Against Himself by Dr. Carl Menninger, who ran a psychiatric clinic in Topeka, Kansas. Mm-hmm. Dr. Carl Menninger was very famous in his day. In his day in Topeka, Kansas, he had movie stars from Hollywood and a lot of people going to his clinic. But he wrote a lot about how people self-destruct.
Yeah.
The essence of his book was Man Against Himself. The essence of it is how we spend our lives basically killing ourselves slowly. In other words, we overeat, we gamble, we drink, we make bad marriages, we destroy ourselves in countless ways. The Gita mentions this many times. This is how we do this.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was the essence of his book, and that book terrified me. Terrified me because you walk around life, even in small town Kansas, so-and-so's an alcoholic, another person has gambles, another person is angry all the time. And you can see these people destroying themselves. And that book terrified me. And I was determined to spend my life fighting against that. I mean, life is dangerous enough. But why self-destruct?
Yes.
Why do that? That's just crazy. So anyway, those three books, I read those three books when I was 13 years old. And I talked them over with my mother. Of course, I was reading a lot of other things, the Greek history, World War II, all that kind of stuff too. So my mother and but we would talk about this all the time.
Yeah.
But the religion, it was a very much of an awakening experience for me, because I was in touch with something, and it really introduced me to the transcendental. Yes. That was the moment that I was introduced to the transcendental, was through music and the church. The church did that for me. Yeah. But again, along the way, I learned a lot about the racial issues. I learned a lot about, frankly speaking, how lucky I was to be born male and white. Of course, in that era, 1957, 1958, the gay issue did not even rise. I mean, that was so far beyond everything. I mean, nobody even talked about, what it meant to be, homosexual, lesbian, or that kind of thing. That issue didn't even rise, not really. So, but it was very, very interesting. But I was really deeply impressed with all my church friends. They were so warm to me and so friendly and just so open. We could talk about everything. And they were tough. I mean, some of these gentlemen in their 70s, like, for example, when I became a church member, one old soldier from the old cavalry, retired master sergeant, he shook my hand, and I screamed. I screamed because it felt like my hand had been gripped by a steel vice, and it was because and he wasn't doing anything unusual, but his hands were stronger than leather and powerful. And a lot of these older men, I mean, men in their 70s, I mean, they had a level of physical power that I never attained during all my years in the Marine Corps. I mean, they were incredibly strong and just tough. They'd had hard lives, and they were very, very tough. And one of the members of my men's chorus, his head, obviously, the top of his head had been broken in a number of places because there was just sharp bones sticking out, no hair. And I was told that he had been on labor gangs down in the South, chain gangs. He'd been on a chain gang down in the South, and he'd been beaten around the head a number of times. So, I mean, these were hard people. I mean, they were very, very tough. and even some of the members of the church, they were young army, they were young army soldiers. Some of them gang members in New York and Chicago. They were used to knives and stilettos and stuff like that. They were tough, but they were all very, very kind to me, very, very kind.
Mm.
And it was just a very, very interesting experience. But again, I want to reiterate, James, I want to make a strong point. I didn't go into this for civil rights or anything like that.
Hmm.
My time in the church, that church was seeking God and meeting the transcendental.
Well,
that's what I was there for.
Yeah, when you first were describing that the first day when you walked by the building, you heard this music that you couldn't ignore. It kind of captured your attention.
Gate in the water.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you were entranced. And it's very
I lost consciousness.
Yeah. And this is very striking from a yogic perspective, to become entranced.
15 years old.
Yeah.
I was only 15 years old, yeah. And I was a typical teenager. I mean, I wasn't, nothing special about me.
Sure. But there was something special about this music. And perhaps in the what you were talking about, William James, is there was something in your personality that type of spiritual experience was receptive to or for. And when you mentioned that you were entranced, I'm in one of the, I can't remember, it's the introduction or the preface to your Gita, you talk about the Mahabharata as being about enchantment.
It's enchantment.
And it sounds to me like this was an initiatory experience in the ways of enchantment into or through the spirit. And those three books you mentioned, I mean, the last one, Dr. Menninger's work, I'm not familiar with that one at all. But when I read Marcus Aurelius, it's like, oh, this just sounds just like Krishna in the Gita.
Oh, yeah.
And it sounds like those three books have all had a lasting influence because they're all part of what set you on this path to become this, let's say, I don't know, devotee, disciple, student, practitioner of the Gita. And I'd just like to ask you more about that sense of enchantment, Bill.
Sure.
And how enchantment, let's say the practical value and impact of a commitment to a path that consciously invites a certain enchantment that can take us beyond the ideas that we might up to now have confined ourselves within.
Okay, let me, I understand your question, and I think I could help you a little bit with it. First of all, I didn't know it at the time, but my mind was open to the experience itself.
Hmm.
There has to be an openness of the mind.
Yes.
To receive this.
Mm-hmm.
If the mind is not open, there will be no reception to what will be heard.
Yes.
Most everybody else would just walk by that church after hearing it. Oh, yeah. Kind of a noise or music or whatever. Mm-hmm. But no, for me, I lost consciousness. Yeah. Because my mind was open, and I didn't really even know it, but it was open to that experiencing of the moment, the moment of the grace that came from that music. Yeah. And that music was a form of grace.
Yes.
Because the mind was open to receive it.
Yeah.
So there has to be an opening. I would say that. There has to be an opening. So somewhere my ego, myself, was not blocking it.
Yes.
There was no I blocking it. It was open. It came in. It came in
I'd like
to my consciousness.
To offer something here as well, Bill, that
sure.
In the Gita, or in the Indic tradition more broadly, one of the images that's used to describe an apt pupil, a student who is ready to receive grace, is to make ourselves like a patra meaning literally leaf, but a cups that are fashioned from leaves. And a good cup has the space to receive. If we approach the teaching, but our cup is full, then grace can be pouring down, but it has nowhere to be received.
Right.
But if we make ourselves open, then all the time, all around us, life is teaching us. And so the idea that this is something we can actually practice and apprentice ourselves to. We can practice this patrahood, this making ourselves open and receptive. And in so doing, be less of a menace to ourselves, be less of an enemy to ourselves, be less of a self-saboteur. And so this is what I'd like to ask you a bit more about, the practical impact and import of enchantment is that when I allow myself to be enchanted, it's almost like enchantment is only possible if there is some receptivity. But that receptivity, when a person becomes enchanted, like sometimes people say in the world, you know, or they have some peak experience, like they do psychedelic, whatever, and think this is going to heal them. Like, no, no, no. That is a signpost. That peak experience is an indication of what you can orient to, what you can gain greater access to. If you then undergo the practice, the process of actually enchanting yourself so you can come and sing your true song, the song that resounds at the level of your soul, that is not distorted by all those short-termist, self-sabotaging, egoic limitations.
Right. I like that. I love that, James. I love that. I think that you have captured the essence of exactly what it is that I am referring to. I think you got it. I think you just completely captured it. Yes. Yes, I agree. Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. But it's also one of the things I think that you mentioned, and I didn't quite think of it this way until you brought it up. But I like your idea of it is a beginning. It's a signpost. It's not an answer.
Yes.
It's an indicator that go this way.
Yes.
This way is where you want to go. It's a signpost. I like that. I really do, James. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, my friend. I really appreciate that. I really, really appreciate that because that's the way I put it. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate your openness and receptivity, Bill. You know, one of my Indian teachers, he says, I thanked him one time at the end of a talk. He says, thank yourself because you were open enough to receive something. And I thought, okay, you know, having just been witnessing this, to my perception, amazing talk from this great master, he says, thank yourself. You showed up, but you came you came open. You came ready to let whatever transpired in this meeting of whatever ideas came through me into the space. You came ready to actually entertain something that was beyond what you'd previously conceived. And so I thank you, Bill, because to me, this is what, since I've known you now, and it's actually more than 20 years now since we first met. But I've always appreciated that spirit of apprenticeship. And this is what, you know, I've been very fortunate to meet people who have been much senior relative to me, who into the years when some people in the world today think, oh, it's just, you know, it's an old time, you know, life's gone past you. No, no, no. In the senior years, you can build on a lifetime of apprenticeship and maintain this sense of expansion and growth and new perspectives. Like one of my Indian teachers says, the peak of a human life could be 85 years old. It doesn't, obviously, physically, hormonally, things will start to be not quite as abundant as they were at certain stages of life. But if one practices learning, if one cultivates receptivity, then we can be making new neural connections, not all life long. And we can build on all our experience at the same time. So there's this key thing of like, practicing examining our habits, practicing checking, where am I in my own way? Where am I deluding myself? And so I know for you, Bill, that question of where am I deluding myself? Sometimes you phrase it slightly differently in a more marine style.
Oh, a little more.
Yeah.
Right. A more Marine Corps fashion. Right, right.
Yeah. But I'm curious about the interface between that commitment to keep searching for the truth and the acknowledgement of enchantment. Because to me, the thing about enchantment, it's like there's an honesty in it. There is a mystery to life. There are forces beyond those that I have currently grasped. And if I pretend that I've got it all worked out, then I'm just being inimical to myself because I'm putting up a barrier to something more beautiful, more powerful, vaster than I've ever experienced up to now. Actually being able to seep into the pores and the core of my being. Right. Whereas if I have the honesty and the humility to own I don't have it all worked out, and as a human being with just these two eyes, there's so much more than I can't see than I can. If I have this honest spirit of apprenticeship, then life can be this glorious becoming. And however many days I have granted to me, I can keep learning, I can keep growing, I can keep uncovering and discovering.
Exactly. But one of the things is also too, James, is when you do see the point, don't be afraid to recognize it. For example, when I ran across Achad Tatsini in the middle voice, aha. Let the love of learning and the enchantment not become an end unto itself.
Yes.
But let it also be a pointing into, and when you do see what is objective within everything, don't ignore it. Make it, again, another signpost to get deeper and deeper into what the Upanishads call that.
Yes.
Don't ever ignore that, the objective. Because the problem with enchantment is you can get lost. I mean, a lot of people that are into drugs, alcohol, etc., think that they're into enchantment. They're not. Enchantment is, it must always be in the realm of the objective. Always in the realm of the objective. It must point to the objective.
Yeah, the way I understand it is that the real enchantment brings us into this resonant harmony so that our whole being is in rhythm with the vaster intelligence that we're part of. So when we are pulled fully into the present moment, we are pulsating at our true accord. And so we come to this oneness. We're in accord with existence. This beautiful Sanskrit word, arita. It's in rhythm. It's right. It's appropriate. It's proper. It's genuinely appropriate. It's that which brings us into harmony with all of ourselves and the wider existence that we are part and parcel.
This is the realm, I think, where yoga, karma, and bhakti all come together. And jnana, bhakti, and also yoga and karma all come together in this. Now, I think that too. It's really quite wonderful. And one of the things, to go back to my Black church, is how wonderfully practical all those people were. I mean, they were wonderful people.
Yeah.
Practical, kind, intelligent. And it was, I really respected them. And and today when I dream, I always go back in my dreams to the world of my Black church. And I go back into the songs that we sang. and I began to cry,
Yeah.
just like I'm doing now.
Yeah.
Sorry, but I go back there and I love them,
Yeah.
and I love that experience. I apologize for that, but I
No,
just
don't apologize, Bill. I find it, you know,
I can't help myself.
no,
Because
when I
every
read,
time I think about every time I think about those wonderful people and that wonderful experience, I just can't control myself.
to me, Bill, you know, this is the one time when I was in Thailand with our mutual friend Ellie. So
Yeah,
Ellie is also a devotee
right.
practitioner, student,
Yeah,
and I was at Ellie's home and our meditation teacher was going to be coming over a bit later, but we'd been reciting Sanskrit hymns, and we both like to do this, so we've been reciting for at
oh
least an
yeah,
hour and a half,
yeah, yeah.
and our teacher arrived, and somehow Ellie and I we were just in hysterics, and we were going to be studying this quite let's say not a quite difficult Kashmiri text. And we were just in hysterics. And our teacher said, this is spirituality. It doesn't exclude anything. So the tears of longing and the ecstatic laughter, only a spirituality that includes the practical reality of life is genuine. What is this? What is spirituality? Spirit is the breath of existence itself. So
Right,
when you describe these beautiful people who embodied a practical, grounded kindness, this is
right.
what it means to be a real Christian, I would suggest. It's like
Oh
you
yeah,
live with practical kindness and you are a good neighbor. You look after yourself so you can look after your community.
right.
And when people embody that, it's such a beautiful experience. So thank you for sharing it, Bill. I mean, I find it very inspiring and always moving. And when I read that vignette, and I hope it'll be published on a wider platform so others can benefit from it and enjoy that experience too.
Well,
But you do
please
evoke.
publish it anytime you want to. No problem. No,
Well,
please put it out there anytime you feel like it.
okay. Well, we can talk about a practical way to do that then, Phil.
Yeah.
Um,
No.
but maybe to close for today, Bill, you brought it back to this formative time that stayed with you ever since, the beauty of the song and the beauty of the human spirit that was demonstrated by these people who invited you into one of their ways of enchantment, one of their
Right.
ways of communing with spirit or with the transcendent. And I remember, Bill, when I read the vignette, you know, you mentioned that when you joined the Second Baptist Church as the
Mhm.
only white person in that congregation, this was a little
Right.
bit different in the Kansas of your youth, but it wasn't a problem because of the way Kansans were. But you mentioned it was a little bit different. And what I perceive, Bill, is that you have lived a life that is a little bit different. You have lived a particular life. And I would suggest that this is also what the Bhagavad Gita and all spiritual teachings urge us to do, to remind us that each of us is the sovereign of our own experience. And because of that, we have to own our idiosyncrasies. We have
Right.
to recognize that we each have particular predilections, we each have particular gifts. Yes, we have a human dharma, we have a conscience.
Right.
But that essential quality of being human is going to urge us to a particular path. And one of the ways of self-enmity is to allow ourselves to be swept along by a mainstream momentum that is not allowing us to sing the chords of our own soul's deepest longing. Whereas if we have the courage to heed the call of enchantment, then we can actually contribute to this glorious harmony of existence itself. And so I've noticed, Bill, that you've had the courage to walk your own path and do that in ways that have brought you into the beauty of human community in many different parts of the world. And so I want to thank you for your example and maybe ask you, having had the opportunity to bridge, or to, let's say, to enter and be part of different communities, and to all the while continue this this human search for essence or truth. How those two things intersect, the willingness to be different and the conviction to follow one's own true path.
One, I would say this: openness is absolutely required. You must be open. And you must understand that you are not the important one. Like when I entered that black church, I'm a white boy. I'm a white Kansas boy. There were a lot of things in that black culture that I didn't know anything about. Ways that people talked to each other, interacted with each other, et cetera, et cetera. But when I entered that world, my ego had to go.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I did not want to sing my own individual song because I knew I had a terrible voice. It was grotesquely horrible, and it would be embarrassing. And my ego would have to suffer incredible levels of embarrassment because I was just so bad at it. But to them, you are going to join this choir, you will have your song, or you're not going to be a member of the choir. Forget your ego. You're not the important one. You're going to enter that world, that objective world, and you had better let go of who you think you are. You have to be open. But to carry out that openness, you have to forget your ego. At the same time, you have to be strong, oddly enough. If you're not strong, one of the things that I came away with is this: when you enter a foreign world, better go alone, because that way you have nobody else to depend on. You only depend on yourself, and you have only yourself to depend on. You have to make your way to that. So on one hand, you have to have no ego. On the other hand, you have to be very, very strong in what you want to do. Otherwise, you're not going to make it. See, that's a contradiction in terms. That's a paradox.
Yes.
But you have to overcome the paradox. You have to overcome the duality of the paradox, or you're not going to get there.
And that's the song. That's the enchantment. It's like that's
yes,
reconciling the paradox of existence and bringing it into a chord, transforming the cacophony of the battlefield into this incredible symphony of the beauty of existence. But
you have to bring it into Dharma, the harmony of karma and Dharma.
Yes. And we can only do that if we're open to things being different from what we've experienced up to now, when it's not been like that.
We have to allow ourselves the opening.
Yes.
And then be strong enough, and both weak enough and strong enough to go into there. And you have to know when to be weak, and you have to know when to be strong. Yeah.
Very good. That's a great note to end on, Bill, I think. The
constant.
Okay.
Oh, gosh.
That's
one. And thank you so much, James, for your ideas, because now I can move on in certain ways, because I really, really like your ideas. Thank you, my friend. I really appreciate your ideas on this, on the signposts and things like that. That's wonderful. Thank you, my friend. I really appreciate that.
I look forward to continuing soon.
Thank you, my friend.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye. Bye for now.